Hello, everybody. I'm Michael Dowling. Um, I don't tend to start these things with much of a script or preparation either. Um, but this is a pretty interesting one. I have a couple very interesting experiences happening with this show and with this, even with tonight. So I actually, Gundaga wrote to me earlier today and asked if I'd like to speak first or second. And usually I wouldn't care at all. And I actually kind of thought to myself, I might have something to learn here. And so I wanted to hear Jacqueline speak first because I felt like I might have something to learn, and I was right. So that was it was cool to be right about that, to realize that that taking the time to hear somebody else, because if I speak first, then I was also talking about this earlier, that if I spoke first, I would be thinking about how well I did speaking the entire next part of it, and not really listening. So I got to actually listen and do that. But it's a very interesting thing to hear what she had to say before me, for a couple different reasons, and one of them is because hearing her description of who she is as an artist is so similar to me in my perception of myself as an artist. And so to listen to all that, and for her to cover all of the psychological and sort of um, emotional aspects of it, um, we're all covered for that. So I can just do the practical stuff now. And but it's really nice. There is a lot of corresponding experience, corresponding idea, and corresponding approaches that that are happening there. And it's really amazing to hear somebody else, especially somebody else who's working in such different approaches to the physical presence of their work, be so much in the same headspace, and to be approaching our work in that kind of process and that creative process in so many similar ways. And I didn't even take it into account of it before now, but I was kind of like listening and thinking about this work back here and realized that I have almost the exact same piece in my history of work. And it's a single huge drawing. It's 8 feet tall, and it's one of the first monumental pieces I made. And it is entirely drawn in red sidewalk chalk. And it is, I call it the Gladiator, and it is a nude woman standing there with boxing gloves on. And it's almost the exact same stance, and almost everything about it is the same. And I was kind of thinking as we were going through that first talk, how am I going to bring this up in a meaningful way? Because I'm not sure why why it matters, and I'm still not sure. But I think it's just profoundly interesting, the tie-in in the work, and that not only hearing that we have such similar sort of approaches, but that there is a piece that I have that is actually, for how I work, almost the same piece, dealing with totally different things, because we can't deal with the same thing being who we are in our world. I'm a guy making work about my experience as a guy, and especially when we're dealing with, when I'm drawing the female form, I'm dealing with something else, something different than when a woman is dealing with the female form, inevitably, and especially in our time. But I do think I'm just fascinated by and curious about how my thoughts grow and get to come together based on starting to understand why those pieces mean so much to me in my body of work and what's going on with my body of work. And sorry, I didn't stop to mention. If you guys have any questions, please stop me at any time. I'm really good with questions. Otherwise, I'll just keep rambling. So this body of work, though, especially if you guys have seen my work before, you will find it to be fairly similar to my work in previous shows and in previous years. But for me, I'm starting to try to escape a little bit and to start to step outside of my safe boundaries and expand beyond where I've been working previously and really discover more and really grow as an artist, and trying to really push into that. I feel like over the last couple of years, I have been working more on perfecting my technique, or not perfecting, but really exploring my technique and exploring the visual and exploring the presentation of art. And now I'm starting to get really interested again in exploring the stories behind it and exploring my personal connection to it, really. And so this body of work is more an expression of that. It is much more an expression of trying to discover something that is growing beyond, and in many cases very subtly, growing beyond what I've been making before. And the funniest thing about looking around at this body of work, some of the things that are the safest things to me that I'm trying to move beyond are the things that most of the viewers see as the most jarring pieces, as the most kind of the pieces that challenge them the most. Those are the ones that are safe to me. And so I'm trying to find places where I go back to this history of classical painting, and that is actually the expansive thought. That's actually the challenging place to me, which well, not that alone, um, but getting back to those traditions is actually a really challenging thing for me at the moment, and I'm super curious about it. And so this piece with the blue lobster and the lemon, although it's a piece that started before any of this other work, it was the wettest piece when it came in here. I work in oil, so everything's always still wet when it gets here. So yeah, it's been an interesting process for that. So that's actually a really important piece to what I'm doing right now. And for me right now, I'm in a place where I'm really evaluating myself as an artist and trying to discover my value in the world as an artist and why it means something to me. It's such a strange job, and so I am not only playing with art history, which I do throughout my work, and you can definitely see the historical references in my work, but I'm playing with that here too. This is more recent art history. I'm thinking about artists who are playing with more contemporary theory, and so I'm kind of playing with the idea of having observers of my work, and those observers of my work are also created by me in some way. And we'll get to where they're actually created by me and really not in some ways. But so there are the observers or the value judges of my work, and what they are very specifically. They're all found objects. They're American Girl doll horses. They're all from the Goodwill, and they're all very specifically. They had to be used. They had to be things that somebody gave away. And the title of the piece is Precious Object, and they're this thing that's this precious object to somebody, and all of a sudden it becomes nothing to them, and then it just gets given away to the Goodwill, or they had a really mean mom and she gave it away to the Goodwill. And then I find it, and then I make it into a new kind of precious object, and it becomes a precious art object. And I do that just by shifting the exterior of it, really, and giving it kind of a new skin. But the interesting thing about it is that these horses that are made in kind of a mechanistic process are pretty well done. Like, they're anatomically very correct. They're good looking, and especially when I make them better looking, they're really good looking. And so when they are kind of this perfect version of a horse as we see it now, and especially they're a perfect version of a horse as we see it now, because most people are actually experiencing horse this way. They're experiencing Barbie horse and American Girl doll horse rather than real horse. And so this is a perfect version of a horse, looking at my version of a horse and judging as to whether or not it's good enough. And that is the point of why they're standing there. And I actually didn't give Gundaga the direction of exactly how they should be standing, did I? Yeah, I kind of told you that they should be observing. But it was very important that they kind of felt like they were a tribunal or some sort of panel of judgment. And that's a theme that goes back in my work for a long time. I think I covered that. Did I cover that? Okay. And so this is one of the pieces, and I like very much as well that coming from my more traditional side of things, and I really do have a lot of tradition in my work, even as contemporary as it kind of looks. Coming from that more traditional side, I'm starting to explore more and more these things that are found object and that aren't made from my mark all the time, and trying to figure out how I can integrate or collaborate with the things in the world that already have some beauty to them and shift them into fitting into my world of classical art and classical beauty. And so these are one of those objects, and there are some other things that I play with too in my work that does that. But it's amazing that that everything kind of came together in this really cool way, where I'm starting to present this installation version of my work that has been going on for a while, but I haven't put out in the world that much. And I'm right next to this other installation artist, and it kind of worked out perfectly. So thank you. And just kind of an amazing, which happens a lot. It's this amazing magical moment where everything's coming together. The notion that this collaborative idea of installation, kind of like my kind of more minor installation as far as compared to the rest of the body of work, kind of walks right into her major installation, where there's history of the work that, for me at least, comes together, and it happens to me a lot. I get these magical moments a lot, but this is a really great one. So good job. Yeah. Actually, that very solitary thing is a pretty dedicated notion of trying to find story and presence in things that don't have actual story happening, and so really looking for character within just the object itself. That the object is of value, whether it's human or bear or feather or whatever it is. That the object itself has that value, and that it can exist in value on its own. And like I said, this is where I'm trying to push with my work, is really figuring out relationships. And even though this is just a bunch of objects again, it's nothing that, I'm not going to talk to the lobster, and I'm not going to talk to the lemon for sure. It's still a group of objects that have relationship within it. And so that is, and you will find a lot of artists do this. We all have kind of patterns, and a lot of artists will really explore the individual for a long time, and then they start to look at their connection in the world and society, which I'm doing right now, and their work starts to reflect that. And so that is where that shift comes from. But keep in mind too, like you see isolation and lonely, whereas I see stoic and brave. And so always remember, when you view work, you're viewing that work as yourself, and that doesn't mean it's wrong. In fact, how you view an artist's work is more valuable than how the artist viewed it originally anyway. But there are different thoughts to why it looks the way it looks, and different experiences to that too. No, I think that question actually makes perfect sense for how you're viewing it. Yeah, and I think more people see it with your interpretation than with mine, which obviously I'm not quite doing my job right, but but I'm getting there. Does that make sense? Like you actually are seeing something that's very, very real in that work, and very common to see in that work. And I don't totally know why it needs to be there, but all those senses of the solo or the single are important parts of it. Starting a new piece, my work comes from generally 3 different places, and they all kind of work with each other. But sometimes they start as an idea, and then I have to figure out title and image that goes with the idea. That's the rarest one. Sometimes they start out with the title or the words that go around it, and that's the most fun one, because then I'm actually really putting a puzzle together. But most often they just start as a visual thing in my head. Just for some reason, like I don't know why I was thinking that I wanted Beluga Jesus. Like it's really the sort of whale version of the contrapposto cross figure, and pretty strange, but it just started as a visual notion, and I started to plug in why that looked like that crucifix form and everything. But as far as the actual physical process of it, everything kind of just starts with making a mark and being brave enough to screw up this lovely white surface and start to put something down. And very luckily, charcoal's a little bit of a different thing. It really does start with the bravery to put a mark down, and then put another mark down, and put another mark down, and just keep building up, and then start evaluating it and fixing it and correcting it, and kind of collaborating with it a little bit to get to where it looks like the subject that I'm intending it to look like, and it's also a really attractive version of that subject. The paint's a little bit different. There's an ease to how I'm dealing with paint right now, and I'm actually, again, with this more recent piece, I'm trying to push out of that and have a little bit more deliberate interaction with my surface or with my imagery. But most of these paintings are paintings that start as just a field of dark, and then I start to put a couple. I guess it is kind of the same. I put a couple marks in using reductive tools, and so I'm using either a rag or a scraping tool or both to get to these images, and that's why they have that kind of feeling of a very abrupt mark. And I work very, very quickly too, and so a lot of those marks do have that sense of sliding across and interrupting each other, and kind of informing each other to both be part of the image that's formed and also be the abstract moments in paint. I would love it if I had both time and the economy to deal with framing everything all the time, but there's a couple reasons why I don't want to do that. And one is that it takes a lot of extra time, and I'd rather be drawing. you know, it takes forever to deal with all the logistics. That's probably the biggest one. And two is that there's a cost to framing. And if I put everything in a frame and present it formally like that, it stops right there. And it doesn't really allow itself to integrate into somebody's life who might buy that piece in a way that really fits who they are. The art is the art, and how you kind of bring it into the decoration of your life is a way more important thing for everybody, for anybody that wants to have that in their life, than it is for me to say this has to have a black frame because that's all I put on everything is a black frame because that's pretty and simple and all the things that go with that. But that notion grew too. So it started off there, and I started doing two different things with that notion. One was the books, the books right behind you. Those are actual books, and they're most of them are like recent politicians' memoirs and kind of the political drivel that you see. And I get all those at Goodwill's as well. All these are recycled items. And so I set them up, and I call them my beautiful redaction series. And so I'm actually really taking something out of the world that doesn't seem to have value in informational exchange, or at least is so like, well, we don't need to get into that. So I'm kind of taking that out of the world and making it into something new and beautiful. And my intent with that was to be able to present drawing in a less traditional way, in a less formalized way underneath the frame. And so it kind of started there. And so those books are actually sealed in something in a clear acrylic medium that allows them to stay out in the world and not be damaged, and not have to have anything else to formalize the presentation. And as I started to realize the value of that breaking down of the formal of the presentation, I started to see the flat work or the pieces on paper that way too. And so I actually seal those in that same acrylic when it's a time that somebody doesn't want to put it in a frame, because taking it away from being that, going back to my term precious object, taking it away from being the precious object, and especially those of us in these generations that are so used to having posters on a wall, it allows that art to go back to feeling like a poster and feeling like, if somebody put tacks through the corners of my pieces, and a lot of them actually have tack marks and like where they got torn from being kind of tossed around and stuff, that makes perfect sense to me. And really, I love that when I see it, that somebody just put a couple tacks through the corners of the pieces to put them up on the wall, because they are kind of just that. They are, these advanced posters and our kind of grown-up rock and roll idols and Pamela Anderson and all those things. And I love that about it. Sometimes it is, have I said what I'm intending to say? But more often than not, it's when I look at it and like this phrase actually runs through my mind, and I make about a piece a day, and every day I get to have this moment where I'm like, holy shit, I just made that. And it's like I stop and I breathe, and I actually, like, I get little chills. Even saying that now, I get these little chills, and it feels so amazing to just realize that I just made something that I am just incredibly happy that it not only looks like the thing that I am intending it to look like, because that sometimes is a little bit of a challenge, but it's gotten moments of beauty that are really inspiring to me and that I love to explore, even just the simple mark. And so that's kind of when it's done is when it feels done more than anything else. Yeah.
I really like the title.
Which one? Oh, the title of the show.
Yeah, the title of the show.
Yeah.
How does that? That's my question. I like it. So,
that's not a question.
Yeah. Can you just tell me more about it? How does it weave all the way through?
It is. It's funny. It's one of those things that for me is I'm like, that makes perfect sense. Why doesn't it make sense to you?
It doesn't not make sense.
It's. I don't know. It's interesting. I turned 50 this year, which is a pretty monumental little experience, and it's a very reflective moment to hit that age. Or at least for me, it was. I'm not sure if everybody else gets that experience, but there's definitely, I'm able to look back on my life, and I don't know. Maybe we get to do this as artists. I'm able to look back on my life and really see moments in my life where, holy shit, I had it figured out. I was doing everything right, and I was doing it all so great. And then it all falls apart. And then I get back to where it's starting to really come back together and everything feels like it's flowing right. And then it all falls apart. And it's not really doing that. It's just that everything's working at the moment and everything's kind of fitting into life, and the business side of it is running well, and the work feels like it means something, and it's connecting to an audience and doing all the things it's supposed to do. And so those moments are wonderful, and it's kind of really reflecting on that while I'm really evaluating my work and how I want my work to be in the world. And I've been trying to push to where my work feels more valuable to me for a while. And so that's kind of looking at that. There was a time at which each painting took hours or days, really. And it's faster now, and it doesn't feel like it has the same value to me. That doesn't mean I want to change how I'm working or the cadence of how I'm working. It means that I want to find a next step in the work that connects with me in a more personal way and that feels not more complete, but like it's saying something more profound in our world. And so I'm looking back at my history to see when I was feeling that, like I was doing that, and trying to pull that back to me. Did I answer that well? Okay, because that was a very quiet response. And it all kind of goes back to art history. If you look at the portraiture, it really does reference portraiture from classical painting. The still life really does reference still life from classical painting. The feathers are a little bit different. I actually consider those portraits of feathers. I actually pick up a feather and I really carefully study those feathers, and then I play with them a little bit. Obviously, add some things that weren't there. But the feathers are, I do consider them portraits. So yeah, I think I'm really more than combining sort of different types of artwork or different genres of artwork. I'm combining all of that from art history and its influence on me. And portraiture comes to me a little bit more naturally. I'm not sure why. Just it's what I've studied for so long, and I actually teach figure drawing, and it's a big focus in my drawing. And it also, the figure can tell the story of humanity a little bit more directly in our time than a still life can. There was a time where still lifes and vanitas and those kind of object paintings were telling a lot of the story of the world at the moment. But the people are what's telling that story now, and we're able to access, like if you see a picture of somebody, you're able to access who that person is in the world and why they're important to be in a picture. Now, my pictures don't necessarily relate to those people, but they relate to moments like that. And so the still lifes, I don't know, they reflect a little bit of an adherence to art history. And the two still lifes in here, there are just two, right? The flowers and the lobster are actually taken directly from historical reference. And so I am actually looking at Henri Fontaine-Latour for that one. And was it Van Dyck for this one? It was one of the old, one of the old Dutch guys for this one. I'll have to look it up. But all the portraits, in a very interesting way, I think, yeah, none of the portraits actually have reference. So they're all coming from a collaboration with the piece itself. As I make a mark, I make the next mark, I make the next mark, and all those things come together to start looking like this person, and that person kind of starts to tell me who they are rather than me getting to tell the piece what it is. And so I guess they're very different explorations, but again, all kind of going back into that history of art. Generally, no. They're just referencing art history in general. They're looking at the classical stances of portraiture throughout history and trying to give this sense of the importance of this person without you getting to know who they are. And there is a lot of portraiture that we get to look at now. Thousands of paintings. You go into all these museums and they have no idea who this painting's of. And we have some history of about 10% of the paintings from art history. All the other 90%, we have no idea who these people are. And so these are a continuation of that history in so many ways. Some of them are a little bit more specific, though. Like the Hot Nun series is really something that like has a personal history for me, growing up Catholic, and just being able to be cheeky and kind of funny about that history and about that experience and about this sort of reverence that we're supposed to hold towards this population of people. But then the whole series of people over here are a continuation of this group of characters that I look at as our kind of founding fathers or our historical, and they're always that size, whether they're drawings or paintings. They're this kind of fictional in my mind. I don't even get to know the stories, and you definitely don't get to know the stories because I don't even know them, and I'm putting them. So we all have to make up our own stories about them, but they're all the founding fathers, and they're all the people that we actually didn't get to hear about in the history of how we became this population, this society, and this culture. So many missing stories and so many stories that we have to make up. And we're one of the first cultures in the world that we didn't take on the religions of our place. We didn't take on the cultural norms of our place. We just took it over and placed all of our stuff on top of it. And that almost never happened throughout history. Like even the Romans knew to integrate the belief structures. Um, and so I'm very curious about our missing history and our missing, like, what we lost in not integrating ourselves into the existing populations as we became America, basically. And so those characters are always uh, these untold stories. That's very much what it is. And it's an interesting topic to go over the commercialization or the commodification of art. And it's a conversation that I've always been very critical of, all the way back to when I was studying in Italy, and I had these amazing teachers, and one of them, Rose, was more critical of me than the other, but they were also always very supportive. But at one point, Rose asked me what I wanted my work to be about, and I said, I don't know exactly what I want my work to say. I had a sense of what it was at that point. But one of the things that I said is one of the things I want to do is actually make a living on my work. And so Rose and Claire, my teachers, are from South Africa, and they have these lovely, like, South African accents. And Rose is like, Michael, that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. And I was like, what are you talking about? Why is that stupid? And she's just like, you cannot have a, what should you call it? Like, she told me I couldn't have a strong longevity in making art and a real connection to the art if I was making it about being in the business of being an artist, or making it about making a living as an artist. And I told her that, and I think this might have been one of the only times she's ever heard it. I was like, you are so wrong. This should absolutely be about this. There are so few people in this world that get to go and not only do what they're supposed to do, but get to go and really follow a passion and follow something that's amazing. And to do that for a living, like for me personally, I get to do that, and I'm wowed by it every day. But when I get around a bunch of other people and I get to tell them I'm an artist and I do this for a living, it's a totally, like, so few people know anybody who actually makes their living as an artist. Like, I barely know anybody else who makes their living as an artist, and I'm in the art world. And so just the realization that the value of actually getting to do this for a living and actually bringing these things into existence and selling them to people, making this how I work through the world in the sense of the commodity exchange or the financial exchange that we have to participate in the world, is a really important part of my life. And it is actually part of my art, being in a commodity exchange and being in a situation where I'm making something that can go out into the world and can bring me money back so that I can keep making those things. And it's this really symbiotic relationship of making, selling, making, selling, making, selling. Selling makes it so I can make more, and I get to keep having that experience of every day getting into the studio and saying, "Holy shit, I just made that." I think that kind of goes to what you're speaking about with the commercialization. I think of it more of commodity as commercial than I do commercial. Not that those things are terribly different in this context. Um, but yeah, that's a good question. I'm going to think about that one more. I'm going to have to get back to you on that. Yeah, yeah, and truly, I do have to balance this idea of making a piece and making sure that it can go out into the world in a way that it is of value to other people, and really does speak to wanting to go into their lives in a way that it supports me still. And it's a weird balance, and I haven't figured out the answer for it, but it's a cool path to be on and to be able to take it on, and to be able to talk about that in the art world where everybody's trying to pretend that artists aren't supposed to be worried about money. We are all worried about money, and we are all trying to figure out how to be as happy as we can doing the things that we have to do every day to make the money that we want to make to live well. And if you're somebody who loves to make things and can do that and make money doing that, that's the most beautiful life. And really, I get to make these things and I get to live my life doing that. Um, that's that's to me that beautiful life and that success place that I want to be in. And so it really does all work together, although I'm not entirely sure how yet. I have kind of major and minor themes in my work, and I play with a lot of different ideas. And so for that one, it is really looking at our religious stories, and this I do in my work a lot. And it does go back to our missing stories and things like that, and our integration into the West as a population and how that worked. Um, and in some ways, and I'm not doing it as much now. It's something that was more important to me a couple years ago. In some ways, I'm trying to create new lores and new legends for a place that doesn't have those with historical length for this population. So we don't have 500-year-old stories of things that happen on this land that apply to the stories that kind of give us kind of the passion of being in this place. You go back to all the other cultures in history, and you think about, you know, you think about Greek lore. Let's think about Greek lore because it's easy, and they have the stories about Poseidon and whoever you want to think of in those times. They're all related to that place. They're all related to how those people live on that land. We don't have any of that, and so I mean, this one obviously is we don't have any beluga whales around here, but but it's still playing with that same idea that I'm trying to make up new lores. I'm trying to make up new legends for our place and our time, and for cultures that have changed so much in the last 100 years as compared to the last 10,000 years. So I'm trying to just explore the idea of seeing those stories come back with new symbol sets and new characters that fill what's around us now. And luckily, we have Google around us, and I'm able to access the beluga Jesus.
I find it interesting. So it's a blue whale, not an
It's a beluga whale.
beluga.
Yeah.
And I think about just where they reside in the ocean.
Yeah.
About Jesus, part of the ocean. There's all these symbols that you can get out of using the life of the ocean.
Yeah, yeah, and there's a curiosity I have about the ocean, and actually a really interesting fear that I have of the ocean, especially considering that I love swimming. I love being in the water. It's a really interesting balance. So those aquatic animals do kind of come into my work, and they're a bit more personal. So it's a really interesting combination of that. And actually, that's great. Now you made me think about something too. Actually, I want to explore that a little bit further now that I think about it. That's a really interesting thing to bring all those thoughts together. So yeah, there's more to that, and I don't know what it is. So next year we're going to talk about this. Cool. Any other questions? Are we totally going over time? How are we doing? Why am I choosing those things? I am choosing those things because of their history or because of their place in art history. And I'm referencing art history a lot, and I've always really liked what happens in art history. I've always been interested in it. Sorry, I got a little distracted. I'm gonna have to think for a second. Pretty good at that. Why am I choosing my subjects? Some of them I'm choosing because they are symbols of our place. What we were just talking about before, what I was just talking about before, and a lot of them actually are things that are sort of safe symbols that people will put into their houses that allow me to explore these ideas of mark making and of drawing and painting in order to communicate. And so when I draw a horse, I love drawing horses, and I have a history of drawing horses from the time that I was in Italy. I was around these stables, and I started just when I had free time, I would go and draw the horses, and I made up all these names for them, and then they started actually answering to those names rather than the names that their Italian owners had given them, so which was a whole new funny story. But I just drew horses all the time, and so I have a nice history of that. So I have a good personal connection, but at the same time, horses sell. People like horses as pieces of art in their lives, and so I'm able to explore like these ideas of art history and humanity through a symbol that means something to me personally, and through a symbol that is something that people want to put into their lives, and it helps me to continue my exploration. And so it's a choice that has a lot of layers. And I wouldn't choose everything that sells, but I would choose things that sell because they have the personal connection to me too. Which, that's not the best answer, but what I got. There's more to it. I'm having trouble kind of articulating the entire connection to all the symbols. Anything else? All right, good. That was a lot. Thank you guys so much.